Hello. It was recently Independent Bookshop Week here in the UK, and of course, I don't need much of an excuse to go out to a bookshop and have a mooch around and pick up some titles that I'm keen on. So as you can see here from the pile next to me, these are some books that I bought recently. Others publishers kindly sent me, so I'm going to go through, talk about why I'm so interested in all of these different titles. I would love to know if you have read any of these books, if you're interested in reading any of them. I would also love to know about some of your favorite independent bookshops. It's so wonderful hearing about bookshops all around the world and ones that hopefully one day I'll be able to visit. So, have a sip of Earl Grey first. Now, to start off, there is this novel called Breanne by Jeremy Cooper, which I picked up from Belgravia Books, which is a small bookshop that's near Victoria Station here in London. And they're also a publisher. So yeah, a really lovely little shop. And I've been so interested in this title for a while, like since it came out, I think a couple of months ago. So it concerns a man who works at this slightly mundane job at the council. He doesn't have much direction in his life, but one day he goes to the BFI at the South Bank here in London. That's the British Film Institute, which does so many excellent programs showing all these old movies. I go there quite a lot. It's really wonderful to see. And he meets there a group of cinephiles. So he starts going regularly. He finds this sense of community there and an interest in film. So this is partly looking at a lot of different films, but also this figure who, finds a sense of community with others. And apparently this is based on a man that does regularly go to that cinema, who I've heard on occasion, if it is this same man who inspired this story, there is someone who, if you go see a film there, frequently before the film, there's a bank that is a sponsor of the cinema, and so they show an advert for the bank before the film shows, and every once in a while you'll hear a man in the back shout "rubbish" after this advert for the bank goes on, and it always elicits a laugh from the audience, but apparently that is who this figure is based off from. So I'm keen to see how that's portrayed in this book, but obviously it's a cinema I'm very familiar with, so I'm looking forward to seeing how it's shown and what films it discusses. Next is Pleasure Beach by Helen Palmer. This sounds so interesting. It's a queer love story. It's about three different women who are all 19 years old, all very different from each other, and all living in Blackpool in England. And it kind of, the structure is kind of inspired by James Joyce's Ulysses, and so it follows their lives throughout a day. And I'm so interested to see how she invokes that style to tell this very new kind of story. Brotherless Night. I love this cover. This novel is about a teenage girl named Sashi in Sri Lanka who wants to become a doctor, but the difficulty she encounters as political tensions arise and war breaks out, and her brothers get involved in the conflict in different levels. So I'm very keen to read this new novel, especially because I've read a couple of books set in Sri Lanka in the past couple of years, but they've both been from a very male point of view. So I'm interested to see more from the perspective of women. I Am Homeless, If This Is Not My Home by Lorrie Moore. Another absolutely beautiful cover, and also look at the insides of this. It's really gorgeous. I love how it's this kind of moon that's eclipsed by an orange, I think it is, or is it a peach? I think it's an orange, isn't it? So this is by Lorrie Moore, the great short story writer. It's her first novel in quite some time, though it's quite a short novel, and this is about a man named Finn who's been visiting his brother in a hospice who's seriously ill, but also how he re-encounters someone that he was romantically involved with before, and how this causes him to question a lot of aspects of his life. Crooked Plow by Itamar Vieira Jr. This is a much acclaimed novel from Brazil. It's about two sisters who discover an ancient knife under their grandmother's bed, and this knife is imbued with lots of powerful and mysterious properties. So it's about the history of slavery in Brazil, but also about family and spirituality and politics. It's a story which is meant to blend kind of social and magical realism. I think it sounds so intriguing. The God of Good Looks by Breanne McIvor. This story is about a young woman who really wants to become a writer, but she's only able to find a job at a beauty magazine, which she sort of feels herself to be above. But once she starts working there and getting involved in it, she sees that there's some more depth to this than she expected, but also she starts to learn more about herself and how she presents herself to the world and how she inhabits it. Now, this story sounds to me, superficially, very similar to the storyline of Devil Wears Prada, which I love, and so I'm totally upped for seeing how this story might play out in this novel. The House on Via Gemito by Domenico Starnone. This is quite a long novel, around 450 pages. The story takes place in Naples, and it follows a family, the patriarch of whom is an aspiring artist, and he feels like he's had to compromise his aspirations to become an artist by working, by supporting his family, his wife, and his 4 sons. And so his family have borne the brunt of his resentment for a really long time. So it traces their story over a long period of time. I think this sounds like a really heart-wrenching story. Be Mine by Richard Ford. I believe this is the 5th and final installment in his Frank Bascom series, his fictional character that he's written about for many, many years. I think I read the first 2 books in the series, The Sports Writer and Independence Day. Is that right? Are those the first 2 books? I really enjoyed them, and so this is following Frank in his twilight years when he's caring for his son who has a medical condition, and is looking back on his past romantic relationships. I really enjoy Richard Ford's writing, but I always feel slightly conflicted about him as a person, because there are horrible stories about when he's been negatively reviewed by some authors in the past, that he's been quite threatening towards them. So yeah, I feel slightly conflicted about reading him, but yeah, I did start reading this aloud actually to my husband, who is a big fan of the series, and was really enjoying it so far. It came across as quite poignant and emotional. Whites Can Dance Too by Kalaf Epalanga. This is a novel about a man who has been traveling around in Europe, performing in a number of music festivals, and he is detained by immigration in Norway for being a suspected illegal immigrant. So it's about his time in that detention center, but also reflecting on the life of a friend of his, and his life performing in Lisbon. So the author, Epalanga, he is also a musician and performer himself, based in Lisbon. So I'm sure this is very much based upon his own experiences. Eunuch by Kristina Carlson. This is quite a short novel about as the title would suggest, a eunuch in 12th century China who is a performer at the royal court, and it follows his life, how he's seen 5 different Chinese emperors in his time and about his experiences, his separation from his family. I think this sounds so fascinating. The Russian album by Michael Ignatieff. This is a reprint of a memoir that was first published in 1987, and in it the author is sifting through a lot of the photographs and documents from his family's history, and so considering his family's past and his uncertain inheritance from this family history, but also looking at Russia's wider history. Also by Michael Ignatieff is his biography of Isaiah Berlin, who was an influential orator and liberal philosopher who moved in circles with Virginia Woolf and Sigmund Freud, and who was very influential, and who incidentally was born in Riga in Latvia. So I'm wearing my Latvian colors today to represent my Latvian heritage. The Other Side of Mrs. Wood by Lucy Barker. So obviously this is a proof copy of this novel whose story sounds so enticing. It's about a medium in Victorian England, and at that time, you know, it was much in vogue, and there was a lot of curiosity about the spiritual world. So there were a lot of mediums around and working, and this is about the kind of competitive world of mediums and looking at the life of one medium in particular. Morgan Is My Name by Sophie Keetch. In recent years, there have been a lot of feminist retellings of Greek mythology. This is a feminist retelling of an Arthurian legend, looking at Morgan Le Fay, who aspired to do a lot in her life, but found that she became a reluctant princess when her mother marries a tyrannical king. This is the first novel in a proposed trilogy. Tell Me What I Am by Una Mannion. This novel is in part a mystery about a woman who disappears in 2004. She leaves behind a daughter and a sister who go on to lead separate lives, and it follows their different stories, but how they come together to try to find out what actually happened to the woman at the center of this story. I read Una Mannion's debut novel, A Crooked Tree, which didn't entirely work for me. I thought it was really interesting. She writes in a very atmospheric way, and does well at getting at kind of subtle emotions. So I am keen to read this new novel. And finally, there is the debut novel, Everything's Fine by Cecilia Rabess. This is about a liberal young black woman named Jess who goes to an Ivy League college and meets there a conservative white man named Josh. At first, she really doesn't like him, but over time they form a connection with each other and eventually a romance. So it's following their story, but also how she comes to understand herself over a period of time. This is an advance copy, and it came with this very trippy bookmark, which I really like. And so yeah, sounds like a really fun and interesting story. So those are all of the books I want to talk about. Like I said, I'd love to know if you're keen on reading any of these books as well, if you have any suggestions of what I should start with, or want to encourage me to start with any of these books. But I would also love to hear about some great independent bookshops that are near you and that you like to frequent. So thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.